My goodness, thank you. Everybody's quiet. That's great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jim Harris. I'm president of Widener University. I want to welcome you to our invited lecture series as part of the Oskin Leadership Institute and the Beideman Visiting Scholar. And the Beideman Visiting Scholar, you read a little bit about this in your program, has been brought to us by Paul and Caroline Beideman, and Paul is here. And Paul, would you stand for a moment? And he endowed this for us, and we were able to invite outstanding scholars to our campus. And so could we give Paul a round of applause and thank him for his support? So you can read you can read the bio that we have inside of Susan Komives, and she comes to us from as the Professor Emerita in Student Affairs Program at the University of Maryland, where she taught in 2000 to 2012. You can see that she's been past president of national organizations. She's served as a vice president at 2 colleges, as the author of dozens of books and monographs. She also has received national recognition. She's the co-founder of the National Clearinghouse for Leadership Programs, a senior scholar with the James Macgregor Burns Academy of Leadership. She's consulted on leadership around the world, is well known in her field, and is absolutely a delightful person to be with and to break bread and have conversations with. She's also, most recently, and in her retirement, she has, which is just recently, and it doesn't sound like she's in retirement because she's going all around the country consulting and meeting with people and carrying on what I think she's passionate about. But in addition to that, she is a wife, a mother, and a grandmother, a very proud grandmother, and is having a little more time with those grandchildren in retirement. And we are just delighted to have her here on campus and looking forward to it. You see in the program also that she most recently, at the end, has been most recently asked to serve as the founding executive editor of the forthcoming New Directions on Student Leadership, which is a quarterly monograph publication from Josie Boss. And Arthur Schwartz actually has been asked to edit one of those journals coming up soon on leadership. So Susan's already, it's a quid pro quo, is already asking Arthur to give back to what she's doing. So Susan, we're delighted to have you on campus. We're looking forward to your remarks. Please welcome Susan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I am now the next biggest fan of Widener University. What a marvelous place you have. I don't think I've met a single person that wasn't passionate about the student experience and about contributing to this fine institution and the community that you're in. I don't think I hear about many campuses that are as actively engaged in their local environment as your leadership, Jim, has done, and that's really marvelous. And thank you, Paul, for the honor of sponsoring this lecture series. I'm thrilled to be here. I have to say, though, that Arthur Schwartz did me a big honor when he called to ask me to do this, and particularly when he said, Susan, we want you to come, but we want you to tell you how you developed the views you now hold on leadership. We want to hear some stories about how that evolved. Some people do or don't know the things that my teams and I have been writing, but what a treasure to be able to be asked to bring that into a presentation. So to the degree that you like to hear some stories, I have a few that I will share, and also talk about some of the things that we have done and some of the things that became important over that time. As Jim said, I retired from the University of Maryland in 2012, and I was telling to someone, I've learned that retirement means you don't get a paycheck anymore from where you used to work. That's so far, it seems like what retirement's about. But I started this reflection process probably a little before that period happened. Retirement does make you reflect on, do you have a legacy, or where did you make a difference in other people's lives? And it's an opportunity for all of us to do that. We should all do that all the time. But a few years before that, that process got jump-started when it was a long, you would never know this experience, a long snowy weekend. You have had a few of those lately, it looks like, from my house in Tampa. I've seen that you have a long snowy weekends. We were having in Maryland a long snowy weekend. It was just terrible. And I had papers to grade, and I was chairing a faculty search, and I had plenty to do. You know, just overwhelmed with the amount of work that we all seem to have. But I was also going to be a day late on a chapter of a book that was due to a publisher, to an editor, and I hadn't even started the chapter. Very unlike me, so it had been worrying me every single day that I hadn't written this chapter. And I had major writer's block, no way to organize the chapter. Never happened to anybody here, right? Never had writer's block. Whipped out that dissertation, right? Did all those things real easily. Well, I had big writer's block. So I cleaned out the shoes in the bottom of my closet, reorganized them by color, and sandals in the back, and I cleaned out the utility drawer in the kitchen, you know, all the things that get dumped in there, found 2 pair of earrings I thought I'd lost, and, you know, I was doing these things, and all the time you're thinking, you know, all the time it's, how am I going to organize this chapter? And I thought I at least need to go down to the computer and get started. And my husband, whose challenge apparently in this snowy weekend was to go clean out our basement, walked into the family room and said, I found this old tube, it's got some old posters in it, can I throw these away? And I said, oh, my posters. I knew right away what he was talking about. And I grabbed those, I said, give those to me. Oh my goodness. And I had not touched those posters since I was a freshman student in 1964 at Florida State University, other than probably putting them in that tube and saving them almost 50 years. But getting that tube structured that whole chapter for me that I wrote. Because getting that tube and opening those, first of all, you never forget when you were, if you had the chance to go to college at 18, you don't forget that transition experience. And if you had the opportunity to live in a residence hall, you don't forget meeting your roommate and walking into that room and what you put on the walls. And that experience came vividly back to me. And I looked at those posters and I thought, I did not know till I reflected on them at that moment how many of the ideas that I developed, gone deep in, dug into, researched, were with me when I was an 18-year-old, that in some way they were important then. And so part of my challenge as I talked this morning is think about the things that were important to you when you were at a younger age that are still with you as mantras for you, as values, as principles that guide your actions. Because they go back to earlier places where family, where religion, where things might have influenced those, but we need to go back and tap into those. So Ralph came in with these posters. It all fell into place to me about that chapter, but it got me thinking about how those early experiences have shaped indeed the leadership scholar and the person maybe that I became. I have to tell you, the posters on the walls in my women's residence hall at Florida State in 1964, you could all write your guesses on a little piece of paper, were Elvis Presley, the Beatles, who had just come to the United States that winter, right? And Sean Connery, who was the first James Bond. So those were the 3 posters on these mine were much more intellectual than that, but I did enjoy those other posters on their wall. The first of these, I want to tell you about them and what I see the seeds of these becoming in my life, and then tell you the model that we have created out of that, and some thoughts on that model, ending with some thought questions for you about your life. But the first of these posters was a wonderful Japanese proverb that none of us is as smart as all of us. None of us is as smart as all of us. I don't know how I would have thought that at 18, but as I reflect back on it, as a young woman in the civil rights era and the women's movement just barely starting in the 60s, I've been excluded from lots of opportunities. Women weren't allowed to do some things. I couldn't go to law school. Women couldn't even apply to the University of Virginia. I mean, there are all kinds of things that gender did not allow to occur. And I know there are many, many other stories one could bring into this picture. But that poster in some ways said to me, bring women's voices into this. Women need to be heard in what we're doing in our shared democratic society and in the careers and professions that we are creating. And part of that was bring Susan into this. I would like to be part of that. I want to be heard and have a place in what would be shaping our institution, our culture, our society. So some of that was an early feminist kind of message to myself. But it led to commitments to inclusion. It led to wanting to empower people when they're involved in these institutions and entities making change. It led to a commitment to interdependence, that we rely on each other, we need each other. It led to a very, very strong commitment to collaboration, to teamwork, that we get better outcomes when we're including all of us in that organization in solving its problems and addressing its issues. It started developing the imperative to trust others, to believe in others' good ideas and commitment and worth when we have an obligation to work together and want to work together effectively. It led to a commitment to the talents and strengths people bring to a situation, and a great humility that I don't have all those. I bring some talents and strengths, but I don't have all the ones the group may need. But none of us is as smart as all of us, and the group can have them, even though any individual may not have them. Eventually, it led to probably more of a systems perspective, looking at the bigger picture and saying there are entities across this institution that work together to accomplish student outcomes, not just any one class or any one residence hall experience. We work together toward that experience. The second poster was a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson, and this quote was, "Nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm." And I loved that quote. You think I'm energetic now, you should have seen me at 18. I loved that quote. It affirmed for me that having a passion, making a commitment, having energy around something that matters to you is an okay way of being, and indeed it might be a desirable way of being. So that led me to think about passion and energy and excitement. It also led me to understand you can be a tired, excited person, but it doesn't mean you're exhausted or depressed person. So you can still love everything you're doing, but there's just too much of it some days. But you enjoy all the things you have a chance perhaps to do. It led to an appreciation of commitment, of being engaged, of being responsible for the communities of practice that one might be engaged with. It led me to value resilience and well-being, and later connecting with positive psychology, some things we've incorporated into our leadership writings, particularly around thriving and how do we use our strengths to thrive together and work effectively together. But it also led in a bigger way to say there's nothing great that was ever achieved without enthusiasm, to an attention to process. How we go about doing things began to be as important to me as what the outcome was. The how mattered a lot, and in lots of organizations I wasn't seeing that be the emphasis. It was getting the job done, but at any cost possible. That was visible in politics, it was visible all around us in the news. So the how became very important to me. And then the third poster that was on my wall is a quote from James Baldwin. And I did not even know who James Baldwin was. I was attracted to the quote, later found out about James Baldwin's life. But this quote was, "Not everything that's faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced." Not everything that's faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. And that helped me realize I was a realist. I always wanted to know what's really going on here. Let's dig deeper for the meaning. We're saying this, but what do we really mean about that? And if we face where we have differences of opinion, we can do something productive about them. If we don't face them, we can't deal with them then in an honest and a way full of integrity. It meant taking initiative. It meant trying to do something and be a person of action, facing things that need attention and saying, I can help take on some of those. I can contribute my time or talents to some of those. Reminds me, some of you know Parker Palmer's work, and it reminds me a lot of some of the things Parker Palmer's written about being suspended on a rock face when he was doing a rock climb one time, absolutely paralyzed in fear, and then remembering the outward bound mantra, which is, if you can't get into it, if you can't get out of it, get into it. So if you can't get out of the situation, get into it. Make it work. If you're not going to have things go away that you don't like to have to do, so how do you get into them and shape them to be the kinds of outcomes you might like to see? So it went on for me to mean dig for deeper meaning, look for meaning behind things, and I think leaders make meaning. Look for root causes and not just surface kinds of presenting issues. But those three posters, if I wrote a letter to my young self, it would be, how would I have known those things led to the threads of commitments and philosophies and values that would continue to grow and deepen and broaden to become the life's work that I ended up doing. And why did I keep those? I kept them more than as a 50-year-old time capsule. I think I kept them because when I lovingly put them in that tube to save them, they even then for me were values and truths and guides that I knew were important to me. They became then the seeds for inclusion, collaboration, for openness to change that influenced this body of leadership work that we have done. And it made me very interested in the change and in future. Alvin Toffler once wrote, change is the process by which the future invades our life. And very early, even as an undergraduate at Florida State, I would say leadership is the way we invade the future. Leadership is the way we shape that future that's coming at us and not let it control us or bounce us around and have to just react to it all the time. Leadership, as many of you know, is socially constructed. You can't touch it or taste it or feel it. But leadership, like Warren Bennett says, is often like beauty. You know it when you see it. You respond maybe well to it or not well to it. But it's very hard to describe for many people. And I have been excited to watch how our views of leadership have changed over time. In 1987, I was leaving higher ed administration practice and moving into the graduate faculty at the University of Maryland. And the leadership books that were out in the mid-'80s about leadership were very confusing to me. If you went to the airport and pulled off the shelf, you know, they call them leadership books in the management section, but two of them were by an author. This has got to be not a nice man. Two of them were by an author named Robert Ringer, and one of them was Winning Through Intimidation, and the other was Looking Out for Number One. And these were leadership books on the shelf. And that wasn't the approach to leadership I wanted people using with me, or I wanted to take, or I wanted to teach to students. They were just philosophies so dissonant with what I valued that I was appalled that those were being sold as leadership books to the American public. Concurrent with that, along in that time, came a brand new leadership book based on a nice study out, which was the first edition of the Leadership Challenge. And many of you know the work of Kouzes and Posner around the Leadership Challenge. And that was the first of their publications, was in '87. So there were some good things to hang on to. But I felt like going into the faculty, I was lost in this leadership forest of all this kind of literature coming at me with no pathways out of the forest. It was hard to sort it, how to know what school of thinking some of it came out of. And I found very early on 3 very pivotal works that were helpful in sorting and creating these pathways. One, and I'm mentioning to you because they were very meaningful to me, and you have read some, or you might read some. One was the wonderful historian James Macgregor Burns and his Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Leadership. And in Leadership, Burns proudly asserts that we have to return to talking about ethics, and that leadership involves modal as well as end values. And lots of business management courses, lots of leadership work up to then wasn't about values. It was about getting your own ends accomplished at all means, and it might not matter what bloody bodies were along the wayside. But Burns says we've got to be talking about principles and values. That affirmation was very important. The second was a leadership scholar named Joe Rost, who wrote a book, Leadership for the 21st Century. He reviewed over 500 definitions of leadership, hundreds of leadership books, and sorted the story of how leadership had evolved into a narrative that you could see the evolution of leadership thinking. All of those kinds of thinking were still with us today, but they evolved out of each other, they developed, and Ross's approach helped me see schools of thinking in leadership, which later helped us develop a perspective on leadership that many have written on around relational leadership and the importance of people and relationships. And then the third of these authors was Peter Vail, a wonderful friend now. Peter Vail writing about managing as a performing art, and Peter Vail did some marvelous work. Now, all of this is happening in a time which was very exciting in the early 90s and the end of the 80s, when we had a convergence of Americans' attention on service, on community action, on 1,000 points of light. Ronald Reagan sitting the firefighter up there who saved people out of a burning building. I mean, we had real attention to people accomplishing good outcomes in their communities, and that idea that the average person is engaging in leadership when they do these things. We had the empowerment of the women's movement, the black movement, the Americans with Disability Act. Women had gone beyond dress for success, which was the happening in the 70s, to now having collaborative voices and being in situations where women's approaches to leading were being written about. So it was a very exciting time to see this paradigm kind of shifting. It was a confusing time in many ways, and Peter Vail's work I thought was very compelling. He said, in these times of permanent whitewater, when things are coming at us fast all the time, things had speeded up a lot by the early 90s. And then a few years into that, Al Gore invented the internet. So we got the internet to speed it up even faster. But it was wonderful, wonderful, fast-paced times. He said, we need to return to some simpler ways of thinking, and simple is often very better. Leadership's very complex. He said some things simply that spoke to me. I want to comment on simple things being better. You get Parade magazine in your Sunday paper, and it's all over the world, the United States, I think we all get Parade magazine. There was a cute little simple essay by a 7-year-old in Parade magazine who wrote about Socrates. And she wrote, Socrates was a great man. He talked too much. They killed him. What more do you want to know about Socrates? 3 little sentences. It says it right there. So sometimes simple things are better. They certainly mask a lot of truth in that statement. Peter Vail said, what we need to be doing in rapid times is not just working harder and harder and spinning around, but we need to be working collectively smarter, we need to be working reflectively smarter, and we need to be working spiritually smarter. So that means the values and principles being added into things. Those 3 very simple mindsets or approaches to working together are very compelling, and I think they are now. Also in this era, Jean Lippman-Blumen, who's a wonderful leadership scholar, wrote, in the twilight of the 20th century, and I'm quoting Jean, we've finally begun to re-examine more critically our traditional concept of leadership. It's based upon an outmoded ego ideal glorifying the competitive, combative, controlling, creative, aggressive, self-reliant individualist who is more suited to a frontier society. That what we socially constructed leadership to be was no longer serving us well in the complexity of the end of the last century and going into this century. So clearly the social construction was changing. And leadership was being viewed by most authors out of that era as relationships, as values, as process, as collaboration, as positive change. Leadership was not just a bag of tricks and do these 5 things and use this style or this strategy and you'll accomplish your ends. Leadership had become a philosophy. It was a mindset. It was a way of being with other people in the world that, if done authentically, was going to create the kinds of positive outcomes that we might try to achieve to. Now, in that era then, those of us that were doing leadership education were left with textbooks to use that were largely written for corporate executives of companies, not for 18 and 19-year-olds who would see themselves very distanced from the examples or the case studies or the material that might have been used. So a number of us in the leadership education field started some model building and conceptual models that we thought could be taught well and effectively and emphasize values that were needed and were important to college students. One of those that I was on resulted in the social change model of leadership that some of you know. And the other is a model that was created by Nance Lucas, Tim McMahon, and I, and first published in our book in 1998, called the Relational Leadership Model. And we wanted very much to be bringing into students' discussion and into their heads, thinking that they could engage with how could they be these ways to be more effective with other people. This approach to leadership, relational leadership, viewed leadership as a relational and ethical process of people together attempting to accomplish positive change. So people together are doing this, and it needs to be relational and ethical. It was grounded in a lot of beliefs. One of those was that leadership can be learned. We can teach leadership, create conditions where people can learn what their capacity is in leadership. They can learn how to do it. We wouldn't be in education if we didn't think that. But it's based in that principle. If you don't think it can be learned, then it would be a challenge to you as an educator to think about doing that. The conceptual model that we developed then for this book has an arrangement of 5 key elements that we think important to engage students in, and all of us as people doing leadership. We have to remember that people, students are people who happen to be students. Students don't happen to be people. You know, we're dealing with people here who happen in their lives to be students. So this model, I think, works with people in general. But the center of this approach is the idea of purpose. That is surrounded and served by practices and beliefs of being inclusive, of being empowering, and of being ethical. And all of that happens, and the how it happens is in being intentional about process. So how the process of going about being a group happens is what this model is advancing. So it has knowing and being and doing dimensions. But I want to dig into these a little bit and go back to some of the stories. Arthur encouraged me to share some anecdotes. Let me describe this model to you. The model is about purpose. Being purposeful is having a commitment that you would make to a goal or an activity, the ability to collaborate and find common ground with others where you're in a group or an organization together. It's that group having a common purpose, wanting to seek to do something positive and effective in their work together. It's also about personal commitments, having a personal vision or goal or passion, something that you might want to work toward. Let me give you a couple examples. One is, in one of our research studies, we happened upon a student organization at a university. It was the Black Student Union the year before, and the group had been a social group on that campus up to that time, really serving an important social need for Black students to find each other and to have effective engagement with each other. But they had campus issues. The campus was located in an area area with a lot of community issues. And this group decided to disband as the Black Student Union and form a new Black student group that they called Umoja for Unity, Swahili word for unity, to deal with social change and the political issues they needed to address on campus. But they didn't want to carry with them the name of the other group, so they actually voted it out of existence to take on a new identity and a new purpose and mission, because they knew they would need to reinvent themselves to have that be seen seriously by the administration and by the community they wanted to engage with. That was a strong, powerful move on their part to actually disband a group, repurpose it, and relabel it to be a group whose mission would be more clear. It's a beautiful example of doing that. Another example, which is not so good one, is my own academic department at the University of Maryland. Our college has gone from 7 departments to 3. 3 of those departments have been blended together to be in the department I used to be in. We are now an amalgam of 3, and it's still dysfunctional. 3 years later, I retired 2 years ago, but 3 years later, those 3 haven't formed to be one. They can't find common place. They can't find what we commonly value. They can't say, what are we as one department? We're instead 3 entities that might share an office suite. So it's not been transformed to be the kind of common mission that it could be, and that transformation would make it certainly more powerful and have a bigger impact. Georgia Sorensen also writes about purpose and writes a compelling argument that on an even more profound level, leadership is really driven by ideas. So when you think about what you have a passion for, it may be the purposes of democracy, justice, liberty, equality, free speech, might even be capitalism of the marketplace, but you're bringing a passion to something bigger than yourself and then looking for places where those things can be enacted. She says about big ideas, we work for them, we live for them, and sometimes we die for them. So big ideas drive our own personal passions and certainly our group passions. But for purpose, we're trying to accomplish shared purposes, we're trying to change or improve something, we want to make things better somehow, and people who come together finding that common purpose is essential in relational leadership. We want people, when they are together, to be practicing the value of being inclusive. And being inclusive means understanding the values, the engaging diversity in views, approaches, and styles that may come from cultural and gender diversity, but different ideas come from lots of places. It's about people and relationships. It's about shareholders and stakeholders who may care about that purpose, but it's also about diverse points of view. When I was appointed vice president of a college in the mid-1980s, I accepted the job in May, and June 15th, I got a call from the president who said, Susan, we need you to cut $100,000 out of your budget. Can you cut $100,000 for me? And I said, sure, I can cut $100,000 if that's what you determine is appropriate for student affairs to do, but I'm not going to do it or tell you where it's coming from till I get there in August and meet with the staff, because I need their input on which things we can do differently, where we can combine programs or services, what things we can go out of business on and not do anymore. Count on us for the money, but I won't tell you where it's going to come from till I get there to meet with the staff, because my view of leadership would be you need that input from those people to make the appropriate cuts, obviously. So that would mean being inclusive then of what needed to happen with that professional staff. Another example for you is in a research project we did exploring this relational leadership model. I interviewed a young man who had been a high school swimmer and diver, and he had gotten ill and was unable to function, wanted to get back in the water desperately. Been going to a number of doctors, not getting the care or cure that he needed. And finally his family went to holistic medicine, and they went to acupuncture. And the acupuncture worked for him. He ended up being able to swim again after that. And he said to me, if my family had not been open to alternative ideas like acupuncture, I never would have found the relief that I needed to be able to swim again. And I thought, and I said, how did you learn that lesson out of that experience? Because this was in a leadership study, he told me that. He said, I learned from that I should always be open to diverse ideas. The best idea may not sound it when you first hear it, but if you don't explore ideas with people, you won't in a group come up with something that might even be better. So I learned from my experience of being open to acupuncture that I should do that with people and ideas. I thought that was a profound lesson being taught to me by a 20-year-old junior in our leadership study. Being inclusive leads us to act, who else should collaborate with us on this project or on this change we're trying to make? Being inclusive means valuing diverse ideas and perspectives, and it leads you to ask, whose perspectives are missing? Who's not here that if they were to shed light on this issue, we would decide it differently? How do we bring that kind of thinking in the work that we do? Being inclusive is what Peter Vail would call working collectively smarter. It's what my poster said, that none of us is as smart as all of us. And it is our goal of creating leader-full organizations, not just leader-led organizations. We'd like everybody to feel that capacity, that they're contributing to the outcomes of the organization by being involved. Another one of the elements of our relational leadership model is that we need to be empowering. We need to have a concept of empowerment that has two dimensions. One dimension of empowerment is the self that claims empowerment. Nobody delegates it to you. You claim being empowered. But the other is to try to create conditions in an organization that remove the barriers or the blockades that might keep people from bringing their best self to the work of the organization. And so we need to both self-empower as well as remove those barriers. It means then working on self and others. It means mattering and marginality. Do you have a sense of belonging in the groups that you're in? It means understanding power and influence, and it means creating empowering environments. I think back to my son when he was 2.5 years old in a diaper, standing on the back of one of our sofas. A lot of you have children and little boy children climb a lot, I found out from this experience. But he's standing on the back of the sofa across the room from me saying, "Watch me, Mommy, watch me." And I imagined him jumping and being impaled on something behind the sofa. And he jumped off the sofa, landed, bounced, stood up, and applauded himself because he had done something really great. You know, this is really good what I did. Of course, I was being cautious about it, but he was self-empowered to do that. He gave himself the support and the accolades for doing it well, and somewhere along the way we lose those abilities to just say, I have the confidence to do this, and I am going to do it, and applaud myself for it. Empowerment starts certainly with understanding self. Henry Ford once said, whether you believe you can or whether you believe you can't, you're absolutely right. If you think you can do something, you probably will. If you think you can't, you're not likely to. So having that I can attitude and I want to be involved and engaged matters. We also need to foster empowering environments. I could talk about this a long time, but I want to just give you one example. In my first professional role as a 23-year-old area coordinator in residence life at the University of Tennessee, I had a marvelous boss. Had a supervisor that set no limits for me and said, Susan, whenever you see anything that you think we could do better or different, or you want to bring student development theory, because we don't know that here, we would like to hear you share that with us. And that empowered me as a new professional to think I could make a difference in that organization. Instead, the message most organizations give new professional is get the lay of the land first, figure things out, don't fall into these landmines, figure stuff out before you start to critique it or raise a question. I would say to you the most important person in any organization, your department, your staff, is the newest person you hired. Whether they're young or not, they're going to see things with fresh eyes, and they are the ones that should be empowered to say, point out to us things that don't make sense to you so that we can face that and change it if it needs to be changed. But they will see it in a way the long-timers don't. The third of the elements that are very important in this model is being ethical. This relational leadership model emphasizes ethical leadership, leadership driven by values, by standards, leadership that strives to be good and moral in nature. It means being socially responsible. It means leading by example. It means being an authentic person who's proud to be known as a person of integrity and character. You would want people to say that about you. It means that you're proud of that. In the mid-1980s, as I assumed that one of the vice presidencies I mentioned, I came to a meeting in the Vice President for Business Affairs office and sat down, and I had a pad of paper and a pen, and I was there as the vice president for the meeting, and other people had spreadsheets and memos and documents they brought, and I sat there with my pad of paper, and I didn't know what was going on in the situation. And as we took a break and I went into the restroom, the administrative assistant for the vice president came into the restroom with me. And she said, Susan, I feel so bad about this. I have to tell you, he told me not to send you the follow-up memo of all the things people were to bring to the meeting. Told me to not send it to you. And she said, I have been wrestling with how to tell you that for the week leading into this meeting. Well, I wasn't real happy with that, but I knew from my professional codes that are expected of us in our professional work of a way that I needed to deal with that, and that was to confront him privately, to talk with him about other people have told me they got that memo and I did not get that memo last week. Tell me truthfully what's going on here. If you think, you know, and we had one of those heart-to-heart conversations, but I did that with him and I did that one-to-one, and we came to some agreement on how we were going to work together, and it wasn't going to be that way. Now, any of us here could have played dirty just like he played with me. I could have come back at him. We're all smart. We all watch TV. You know, we know how to do these dastardly things, but I couldn't have slept at night if I had acted those ways instead of confront him in that way. We should have known something because he was a vice president of a failed savings and loan in 1984. So there were some, I shouldn't be pointing at you, huh, Paul? There were some probably issues he brought with him into being a vice president for business administration. Certainly a smile came on my face when I heard he got terminated 6 months later. But the action like that was so incongruent with professional life in higher education and with the ways we want to be with each other that it certainly was shocking to me. In their book, Systemic Leadership, Kathy Allen and Sin Cherry write, relationships are the connective tissue of organizations. Relationships built on integrity are the glue that holds us together. You need to trust the people in the office next to you. You need to trust the faculty member beside you, the students down the hall from you. That when you can trust each other and you're truth tellers to each other and you support each other, you have a strong, healthy, vibrant organization. If that's not true and you don't know who to trust, then that organization quickly becomes dysfunctional. Amitai Etzioni, who's a wonderful sociologist, deals with issues of character, has written, communities speak to us in moral voice. They lay claims on their members. Indeed, they're the most important sustaining source of moral voice other than the inner self. What the norms are in the culture around you, what sustains your ability to be moral and act ethically. If that's a dysfunctional culture, it challenges your compass. And hopefully we're creating moral communities around us. So it's critical that we create ethical spaces all around us and make that part of the moral dialogue when we're addressing and approaching issues and decisions. Now, this model also is all encompassed by the idea of being process-oriented. How this happens is the process a person or a group decides to enact. It refers to how a group goes about being a group, sustaining, becoming a group, analyzing their purposes. It involves several key processes, and I think 4 that work very well in our work are reflection, learning, collaboration, and community. Those 4 are process goals that if we achieve those in working together, we have healthy processes. Let me mention each of these. Reflection is probably one of the most powerful kinds of learning that we do. When we thoughtfully stand back and look at the experiences and the messages that are coming at us and make meaning out of those. It causes us to reach way more deeply into ourselves, to our values and our social consciousness, and our beliefs and our faith, the rudders that guide us in times of permanent whitewater, to identify what something means to you and why you're resonating with it or why it's repellent to you. I mean, that personal meaning making that we do is essential. Emerson says we need to live from a great depth of being, and it goes there. One of my best bosses was the president of a university. He'd been a president of 5 colleges and universities. His name was Arland Christianer, very important to me as a mentor. And he used to say the values of a liberal arts education are when you knock on yourself, there's someone there to answer. You've developed an inner self that can talk to yourself about things that are important and values and have those kinds of discussions. I had a student friend recently post on Facebook that she loves BuzzFeed quizzes on Facebook. She said because they're quicker than all that serious self-reflection we had to do in grad school. I thought that was funny. If you don't know BuzzFeed quizzes, you would not get that reference. But things that happen to us or to our groups don't become experience without reflection. They're just things that happen. If we don't stop and think it through, think what meaning we would make out of that, try to figure out why those things happen, what would we do next time differently, or should we do again the same because it worked well? If we're not doing that, then we're not bringing reflection into the serious process of the group. It should be built into every staff meeting, should be built into every advising appointment, every one-on-one supervision. We need to reflect together in smarter ways, according to Vail. And this takes time. We need to make space and time in our lives to do this. If I were to say to you, when you come back from spring break, from Belize even, where some of you are going, but if you come back from spring break next week, and I've enrolled you in a course just for the last half of the semester, it's called Cloud Watching 101. And all you have to do is figuratively or literally lay out in the grass and stare up at the clouds 3 times a week for half an hour each time. Could you pass that course? Now, some of you are saying, oh yeah, I need to recharge my batteries, and others are going, oh my God, I'd have 500 emails. You know, how in the world would I take the time to do that? So learning the art and skill of reflection and making it important in our lives is critical as a process to move smartly and wisely into our future. Another one of the characteristics of good process is learning and learning together. One psychologist has said, tomorrow's illiterate won't be the person who doesn't know how to read, it'll be the person who doesn't know how to learn. Peter Vail says it's not an exaggeration to suggest that everyone's state of beginnerhood is only going to deepen and intensify, so that from now on each of us will even more profoundly and thoroughly settle into a state of being a perpetual beginner. We have to always learn something new to do our work. We have to always find new resources. We have to always think through together how to approach new challenges. And that takes comfort with incompetency skills, not competency skills. It takes strong self-confidence to be able to say, I don't have a clue what's going on here, but together we'll figure this out. And we can learn together how to approach this challenge or this issue, and together we can do that. So it brings together several of these principles. So groups that learn they can learn together expand their capacity to be more effective, that they can learn together. You all know that collaboration is important. I won't dwell on collaboration. I think it's critical to the kind of processes that reflect relational leadership uses. One of the observations I've made over time is I am ready to say publicly, Robert's Rules of Order is the death knell of collaboration. I have come to dislike very much Robert's Rules of Order. As a student government officer in the 60s, it was the way you could show how smart and fast you were, to cut off debate, move to the question, cut off those people who were saying things you didn't like, and get a vote. You know, and so people learned to use Robert's Rules in ways that were excluding people from the conversation instead of including them in that conversation. I do know that boards and many groups need to make a motion and do things officially to be on record. And when I became in as president of the Council for the Advancement of Standards of Higher Education, CAS we call it, that's a group of 37 professional associations that send one person to be a member of the board of directors of that group. And that's an ongoing group that every standard is reviewed word by word to make sure it says what we can all agree on as a profession should be the standard of practice in our field. We decided very early on not to use Robert's Rules in the way it was designed to be used, but to go through this discussion, to have the discussion on what we felt about the words that were being used, work out those issues, and then someone says, looks like we've reached a point where we all agree, are we ready for a motion? I move we adopt this standard, I move it by acclamation, unanimous vote. So we get to a point by working it through without the boundaries of Robert's Rules to be able to have that kind of collaboration. And that worked very, very well for us. A critical skill in collaboration that we need to all learn and practice more effectively is listening. We need to go back to serious work on listening skills. St. Benedict wrote, "Listen, my children, with the ear of your heart." Langston Hughes has a character called Jesse Simple, and Jesse Simple admonished us to listen eloquently. Listen eloquently. My 4-year-old son Jeffrey one time grabbed my chin, turned it toward him, and said, "Mom, listen to me with your eyes." He wasn't getting that level of attention that he needed. So we need to listen eloquently again as we're working with others effectively in collaborative situations. And then the last of these mindsets to bring into process is community. We need to be functioning as healthy communities, as communities of practice, and be responsible members of communities. Our shared agenda, I think, for our future as humans together is to be leaders, be people, be citizens who build and sustain community. How many of you seen the redwood trees out in California? Seen the big, tall redwoods? Okay, some people, not everybody. I had not till a couple years ago. One of my friends approached the park ranger out there and asked the park ranger one time, "Why don't you see one of these trees out there in the prairie or valley standing just straight up all by itself? Why are they all so jammed in?" And the answer was, well, they're thought to have one interlocking root system. No one of them could stand without all of them standing tall. Communities need all of us to be glorious and not just a person alone standing out to do that. Everything is connected. Natural systems, human systems are connected. Everything is interdependent. Community is a metaphor for that interdependence. Widener is a community, your residence hall floor is a community, the swim team is a community, each classroom you represent is a community, the people in your office are a community, your committee you serve on, they are communities, your family is a community. Community is a place maybe, but is a spirit. It's a lens you bring to how I'm going to be in relationship with each other. And in a very Eastern Zen-like kind of way, being in community with other people heightens our sense of responsibility for their well-being and their for ours. We care about each other. The ethic of care is important working together in these communities. We need to know each other better. We need to feel that responsibility. When Jeff was 5 years old, I went with him to his preschool called the Post-Sunshine Ranch. And they were having one of those fun fair days with the moon bounces, and they played little games, and everybody got a goldfish in a bag, which every parent hates. No parent here wants to come home with a goldfish in a bag. And as we're walking down the sidewalk, this cute little girl and her mother passed us, and she said, "Hi, Jeffrey." And I said, "Jeffrey, is she your friend?" He said, "No, she just knows my name." I thought, wow, how profound that was. How many people in your communities of practice that are important to you do you only just know their name? You don't know more about them in a way to form the true, authentic relationships that will sustain a community in times of conflict, in times of loss. And so we need to know more than just their name. At the start of school, when I was at Stevens College some years ago, we have a first look fair where students would sign up for organizations and then they hold the first meetings. And a couple of weeks after school had started, I had 2 student presidents of organizations come in to see me separately. One popped in and said, "Susan, I don't know what I'm going to do." We had 25 people come to our first organizational meeting. I was really excited. I told them what the group was about, told them what we're going to accomplish that year, announced the projects we were going to take on, tried to get out a little bit early because I know people are busy, and the next meeting only 5 people came back. The other student came in to me saying, "Susan, I'm so excited, I can't believe it." We had 18 people come to our opening meeting. We had name tags for them. We broke them into groups so they could all talk about why they came to this group, what they wanted to get out of it. We then brainstormed what activities we thought would be good this year, and I gave everybody, you told me this, I gave everybody those 3 little dots, and they could go up and put a dot on the dots on the things they would most like to see us do. Then each officer stood up and announced what their committees were and that they would welcome people to join. This is what that committee did. And we had our second meeting, and 28 people came back. A couple didn't come back, but some brought their friends. And I'm so thrilled with that. Those 2 processes were totally different. Those processes went from the one president of that organization being alienating, not engaging, not creating community, not caring about why it was important that you're even there, and the other president making it your home, making it your community, and you mattered and you belonged here. And that's process. That's what happened between those 2. All of this really comes together for me in what I would consider one of my peak experiences. It's kind of odd when a bad thing that happened becomes a peak experience, but I'm very proud of it actually, that leadership is a shared process among people working on a common purpose. Stevens was a struggling and is a struggling small women's college. I had 17 staff members and I was told I had to cut 5. That our budget was looking terrible. It was our share of the cut. We were cutting all across the board. I had to cut 5 positions out of 17. That was going to decimate many of the things that we were doing in student affairs at that time. Had kept the staff posted on what was going on with the budget, let them know the number, said be thinking about your functions and the work environment, be thinking about your plans, and my goal would be to try to keep everybody we can. Let's see what we can do with this. The whole staff met together, and as that meeting started, 2 people said, "I was going to job hunt this year anyway. This was a good time for me to move on. I'm just going to say now I will do that. It would help the group, and I'm ready to job hunt. I know I can land something." 2 others said, "I was going to go back to get my doctorate. I've already applied places. I know I will get in. I'll just go ahead and say that." And another person said, "I was going to retire next year. I will retire this year." I had 5 people step up in that community that cared about each other with their own plans meshing with what we could do as a culture. We proceeded then to reshape our work functions around the people that would be remaining so people could claim the jobs that use their talents best. But that turned out to be a peak experience probably in my career from what was a draconian challenge to cut 5 positions out of only 17 at that institution. So this leadership philosophy, as I've turned to it, has been helpful personally. The stories, I hope bring that to life. So as a philosophy, keep in mind you want to be purposeful and help groups understand their values and their mission, their shared purpose. Believe in embracing things inclusively with empowerment and being ethical and recognizing the thoughtful and intentional ways process support that occurring. Let me end with 3 or 4 thought questions. Samuel Johnson once said, we more often need to be reminded than informed. So I just want to remind you of things and think about yourself now in light of this. What are your posters, really or metaphorically? I mean, what are the quotes at the end of your email signature line? What are the themes you post on Facebook? What are the things you're known for saying in groups or the values you bring to that? What would people say are the guides that you share with others like posters might have done for me? My second question for you is, what did you used to think leadership was when you were little, and what do you think it is now? How has it shifted for you over that time? Where do you see your views of leadership may be going? You're starting to see a transition, perhaps in your own thinking. In the students that we interviewed for our leadership research study, we heard them start to say things like, I see leadership now as a process. I see that I can be a leader in a non-positional role as well as positional. I can be a leader even if I'm not the leader, that I'm doing leadership with others from any place in the organization. My next question is, what philosophies do you hold about leadership? Are you comfortable working collectively smarter, reflectively smarter, spiritually smarter? What philosophies, what mindsets do you bring to leadership? And do you engage in leadership from a place of interdependence, where we need to really depend on each other and use the group to support our outcome goals? Let me end with a real sappy small story. I love this when I heard it years ago. It's really sappy, so get ready for a sappy story, but I have always liked it. It's the story of the young mother who decides to take her little girl to church for the first time, and she's afraid the little girl will get a case of the wiggles and disrupt the service, so she doesn't want that to happen, so she takes the big blue picture of the Earth from outer space, rips it out of National Geographic, cuts it into puzzle pieces, puts it in some tape in her purse, and they go off to church. And sure enough, the girl starts to wiggle at some point during the service, and she says, here, honey, put this picture together. And in no time at all, the little girl's tugging on her mom's skirt, saying, Mommy, I did it. I put the picture together. And the mother said, how did you do that so fast? And she held it up, and there was a full-figured picture of a person on one side, a man. And she said, I put the person together, and the world came together by itself. Well, it isn't that easy, but it starts with each of us. It starts with each of us living an authentic life where we are responsible, committed members of the communities that matter to us and engage with each other in these trustful, ethical, and relational ways. Leadership to me is often best said, I think, by John Wesley when he wrote, do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as you ever can. Leadership is a way of being that you take with you all the time, and you just don't make a difference in your world. When you practice leadership that way, you are the difference in your world. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Good. Good. Thank you. We have a few minutes for comments or questions. Yes.
Have you done any corporate training with this concept?
The question was, have I done any corporate training with this concept? And on a limited basis. So I'd say more non-for-profit than corporate. So the value system of this approach, well, I have been asked to do non-for-profit things. Would you like to add more to that? I mean, what would your critique or?
I come from the corporate world, and there's obviously a need for a different approach to leadership in the corporate world. Because as you also with grinding it out and grinding through it and all those issues. And the whole sense of teams in the corporate world.
Yes, this fits the teamwork.
To be effective.
Yeah. Although it's what Career Center people here would tell us, Laura probably would tell us, it's what employers are coming to campuses say, we want people who really understand teamwork and how to work on a team. We don't want independent agents out there doing their own thing. So, yes. I would certainly say this is an approach to leadership. I think it's a very useful one to be an authentic person wherever you go when you're working with people in your office and on committees. There are other approaches to leadership that maybe need in crisis and command situations, and there are lots of ways we need to be facile in our application of leadership, but being this kind of person who carries leadership as a way of being around with you as an authentic person, I think is very critical. Yes, Paul.
I think the thing that you said in your remarks with the most conviction was that leadership can be learned. And obviously I think we all agree with that. In your experience, what's the best how around that? Or how is the how most effective? Is it a discipline that stands alone that people come to learn about leadership? or does it get integrated horizontally across different disciplines? And which model works best as a combination?
Well, as you keep going on with your multiple choice approach, the answer is all the above. So now that I wouldn't even say there's a best way, partly because people learn differently. So some people learn by studying a theory, an abstraction, then they try to apply it and they get feedback on it. Other people do things, then someone helps them figure out why it worked. And so one of the best things about a small private college like this is a student comes to college and wants to learn leadership. It happens all across the environment. They're learning it in their residence hall, on being on the editorial board of the student newspaper, in student government. They're learning it in a lab. They're learning it when they're in their internship. They're learning it in classes when they break into small groups and do projects. So it's happening all across the board. But the study of leadership actually gives them the language to use. Having formal leadership training lets them realize how it was socially constructed and changed over time. It affirms for people that are doing facilitation and like being in a process with others that that's leadership too, when they think it really should be the tall commanding person that forcefully makes decisions from the front of the room. And they shake that knowledge then to realize they're doing leadership. So the study of a topic gives you more handles to use, gives you more perspectives to bring, and you need good mentors like you have here as advisors and hall directors and faculty who help students reflect on the experiences they're having so they can bring it out of them. I think it takes all those. I'm thrilled here, the certificate program, the discussion about the minor, but also in student life, the work that's happening with residence halls and student government and international students, and so it's happening across the environment. But the leadership lens has to be used, and that has to be the outcome that's processed. That's a good question. All the above is the answer.